Hi everyone, we're just starting to get some people trickling in. My name's Sarah from Health Translation SA, and I'm going to be hosting today's webinar. Over the last month, we've had this spotlight series on how you can engage with consumers and community members from specific demographics. And this week, we're really excited to hear about youth. See if I can get this working. So before we start, I want to acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of the Adelaide region. We recognise the Kaurna people's cultural, spiritual, physical and emotional connection with the land. We honour and pay our respects to Kaurna elders, both past and present, and all generations of Kaurna people now and into the future. So just really briefly, who we are at Health Translation SA. We are the South Australian-wide National Health and Medical Research Council's Research Translation Centre. And so really we were established along with other centres across the country to help speed up the adoption of research findings into improving practice. So essentially we're seeking to improve the health of the community. And there's a whole heap of different ways we do this, but one of the ways is to empower the people and build the capacity and capability of individuals involved in research translation so that we can really drive impactful outcomes. So this, one of our strategies, increasing research translation, leadership, knowledge and skills, which is where these spotlight series have come into what we do. And the Spotlight series, they're a month-long education initiative to build knowledge in key areas of research translation. You can see down the bottom in the different colours, the different topics that we have presented on in the past, ranging from implementation science, research policy partnerships, communication, co-design, a whole heap of others. They are all on our website. So if anyone would like to see the previous recordings or the materials that go along with them, you can access them on our website. But what these are, it's a month-long initiative focused on a specific topic. We have 4 by 1 hour webinars held weekly, and we get external experts. So it's not us in Health Translation SA, but it's experts across mainly South Australia, but also interstate as well, coming to present on the topics. And there's a whole heap of other resources, latest publications or findings that will appear on our social media channel during the month, but again, also on our website. So this one about partnering with consumers or community members and focused on youth today. But over this seminar series, we have focused the other 3 weeks on older Australians, frail, homebound and bedridden people and people with intellectual disability, and culturally and linguistically diverse. And so these previous 3 weeks worth of webinars can be found on our website. But today we're excited to hear from Jaameeta and Angelica, who are both going to be focused on how you should engage with younger people or youth. And so first we're going to hear from Angelica. And Angelica is driven by rights-based advocacy and a commitment to addressing social inequalities impacting historically underserved communities. She's dedicated to the principles of meaningful, genuine and affirming youth engagement in all of its forms. She's an advocate, social and health researcher and a policy practitioner with over a decade of experience in youth and health policy, community development and research. She served as the Australian Youth Representative to the United Nations in 2022, and she currently manages initiatives such as the Future Healthy Countdown 2030, which is Australia's national initiative tracking the health and wellbeing of children and young people and driving evidence-based policy change for future generations. Angelica will present first, and after her we're going to hear from Jaameeta. And Jaameeta prioritises working in partnership with young people to co-produce evidence needed for good health and wellbeing. She draws on the principles of youth participatory action research to guide her work. Jaameeta is the research methods lead for the Adolescent Health and Wellbeing team at the Kids Research Institute Australia. One stream of her program seeks to understand what it takes to create an enabling environment to support knowledge co-production, the strategies, resources and competencies. And so I'll hand over to Angelica in a moment, but if you have any questions during the presentation, please pop them to either the Q&A or chat. And we will ask Jaameeta and Angelica to address these at the end. So they're going to present for around 45 minutes. And I will stop sharing now and hand over to you, Angelica.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm just going to see if I can share my screen.
See if you can take over.
Are you seeing slides at all? Cool.
I'm seeing, yeah, not in the presentation mode yet. Yes, perfect.
That's better. Awesome. Cool. And hopefully it'll pop up so I can see you all. But thank you for the opportunity to have myself and Jaameeta share with you all about partnering with young people, which is something that we're both really passionate about. And we hope that the insights that we provide today will be one that's engaging, supports your work, but also encourages you to seek out partnerships further with young people. Before I go any further, I would like to acknowledge also the traditional custodians of the land from which we're all joining from. Myself, that is the lands of the Wadamadigal people of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have continued to nurture this land for thousands of years. And so I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present as well, and extend that to any Indigenous people who are attending or watching this session today. So I'm going to go over to our next slide. In this presentation, we're going to be covering 4 key questions that will be building your understanding of what partnership looks like with young people in research, whether that's health research or broadly speaking research. And those 4 questions me and Jaameeta thought were really foundational to making sure that we understand how we do this right and how we do this in a way that actually reflects what young people have shared over many years about what meaningful research and partnership looks like to them. Before I run through those questions, I would like to point you to the QR code that you can see up on the screen. So this QR code is for a Mentimeter. I'm not sure if anyone has used Menti before, but Menti is this really cool tool that we use a lot in terms of engaging with people in sessions. And what we'd love to do is to see how are you understanding partnership with young people at the moment? So if you go to menti.com, you can scan the QR code or just type menti.com in your browser and put in the code 11442416. You'll get access to a few questions that will appear, 2 questions, and you just need to put your answers and responses in there. What we will do at the end of the presentation is to spotlight what everyone came up with to those questions in like a really beautiful word cloud. And I think that will really add to this conversation about how we see partnership, what is our understanding, our activities that we think are foundational to meaningful partnership. And we're really curious to see what you come up with. So I think it's been put into the chat for you as well, the link to participate in the Menti. So you can do that at any point during the session. So we'll be covering 4 key questions. To start off with, we will be covering, what does participation mean to you? Jaameeta, I don't know if you wanted to jump in and share the next question and why we're asking it.
Yeah, we're also going to try and unpack what motivates you, and then that will lead into how to approach it.
Yeah, cool.
And we'll probably end with what's needed to support it.
Amazing. And you'll see that me and Jaameeta are going to be chatting and really doing this like in a dynamic way where, Jaameeta will chat a bit to things and I will. That's in the spirit of true partnership and how we created this session today, making it as dynamic as possible, just like any activities with young people is. So let's begin with the first question, which is, what does partnership mean to you? And why we specifically wanted to talk about this is it's important to come back to this question as to why we're doing partnership in the first place. We know that young people aren't a homogenous group and we all have different lived and living experiences, perspectives, ideas, different preferences that we have on how we want to engage in research. But we also know that all of those are valid and that partnership can include all of us. And that's the same for us as researchers or practitioners in the work that we're doing. So this is why we've come up with this question and discussing it. And so I'm going to ask Jaameeta, how do you, as someone who works in this space, how do you see partnership?
I think a really good place to start is to situate this in this realm of consumer involvement. And I think that often means engaging with end users of research. And here consumers are people with lived experience and have a role beyond just passive participation. I think there are lots of terms and models out there on how to partner with young people in knowledge co-production, but the most common ways to engage seem to be in advisory roles, co-design roles, and so under advisory roles, young people are usually consulted for high-level input across various stages of the research cycle, typically around recruitment and data collection approaches. I find these are finite roles with consultation on ideas and materials that have been developed but need a consumer alignment check. And often it's older adolescents who are more likely to get opportunities to do this than the younger cohort. Co-design typically is a very focused engagement to co-create something at a very specific point in the research cycle. So for instance, designing an intervention or a program or unpacking a particular issue. And I think sometimes this term is used interchangeably with co-research, but there needs to be a distinction because co-research, we think, represents a collaborative approach and it reflects the elements of a partnership. It includes shared decision-making across that entire life cycle of the project, all the way from agenda setting and identifying what issue to focus on, all the way to creating those outputs and then embedding that research into practice. And of course, the extent and type of engagement can be fluid and it changes across the project as it evolves and relationships develop. But yeah, so that's kind of where I'm sitting. What are your reflections on partnering with young people, Angelica? What does good feel like?
I love this question, and I could go on for hours talking about this question. So I will share very briefly, and I intentionally put some pictures up there because I think it's like cool to visualize what partnership looks like for young people. For myself, I've been involved in a few different research partnerships in different spaces on different topics as a young person, also as a co-researcher as well, and also wearing the hat of academic too. And so getting to experience these things in different ways has really taught me some and shown me important things. So I guess what good looks like to me is creating spaces, research spaces together. Really getting to define how we would like to be supported as young people, being in partnership that's engaging and where we're learning together. So not just the young people learning about a topic that they're interested in or learning about different research methods, but also the researchers or practitioners also learning as well. And we'll get a bit into that in one of our later questions, but also being part of activities that are mutually beneficial. So understanding from the outset, what is it that actually young people want to get out of this and also want to provide, and also vice versa. That leads into collaboration and having valuable contributions. So really knowing that the ideas that you're sharing are going somewhere, are contributing to something. I feel like that's what good looks like. And I've put in really big bold here, having a real hand, so actually having a real contribution to research at each stage of the research process. And that can look like different things, and we're going to give you some pointers on things around approaches a little later. But these pictures that you see are me getting to meet new people along the way. People have become lifelong friends just from doing research projects together as young people. You'll see an image of a report that we actually got to co-author as young people together and design together and create a whole research methodology that was so new to myself and opened the doors to me realizing that I really love to do this stuff. And then the other picture you can see is presenting. So actually getting to share that contribution to the world. And so when you're thinking about partnership with young people, it's like there's multiple different avenues and spaces along the research stages that you can consider how you do that in a meaningful way. So I'm going to pass back over to Jaameeta.
And so I guess one of the things that you think about as the adult ally in this space is what does operationalizing this partnership look like? And I think at the heart of this is this idea of sharing power. So we've popped Arnstein's ladder there. I find frameworks are just such a great tool for unpacking complex, messy issues, and power sharing and relationships really fall in that space. I think frameworks really help you intentionally reflect on the style or model which you want to use to engage with young people. And that really helps to set the stage for the work. The expectations of young people, your expectations, thinking about what's feasible, and how this partnership fits into the core focus of your research. Ornstein's ladder was produced in the 60s, and it was more around citizen engagement and public development projects, but it's at the heart of Hart's ladder, which specifically looks at how to engage children and young people. And so the reason we've got it up here today is to position where we sit on the spectrum of youth engagement. And I think Angelica and I both lean towards partnership and opportunities for equal power sharing. But that made me pause and think, so what power do I hold as an adult ally in this space? I think I hold a lot of the key decision-making power. So what the research will focus on, generally how we'll approach it, what's the general flavor of the response that we're trying to advocate for. And of course, these decisions are shaped by the resources that are available to me, like my grant funding scheme and the context in which I operate, both the broader context, which, for instance, determines how I can use my grant funds, but also that proximal context, the institution that I work at, and what sort of culture and responsiveness there is to partnering with young people. And I think being clear about this right at the outset, and then sharing that with young people that you want to partner with, is really helpful for setting goals and roles. And then, of course, implementation of these goals and roles in the work is supported by relationships that you kind of have to nurture. But this transparency really builds those relationships, creates trust, and then you can really partner on this shared endeavor. How does that sort of sit with you, Angelica, the discussion around power sharing?
I think that this sometimes gets quite overlooked when it comes to partnering with young people. And I often say to people that young people really know when we're not being transparent, when there is like unequal power dynamics, and they can be quite vocal about it, or sometimes not, because of the way in which the environment has been set up. And so I really, like Jaameeta said, I think this ladder is a great example to kind of speak to why you have to think about power in terms of partnerships. Who gets to decide? Who gets to decide the directions of things, and at what stages do decisions get made? Even with, talking about context and resources, I feel like I'm going to preempt something that we're going to talk about later, but being transparent about like what resources are available in this partnership with young people. Don't be afraid to say that. Don't be afraid to discuss these things as well, so we can understand the parameters in which we would like our participation to look like. But ultimately, I think there's a big orange circle around relationships for a reason. Foundational, what is foundational to meaningful partnership and engaging with lived experience of all kinds is relationship building and that rapport, and understanding the different roles we play and the ultimate goals that can shift, actually. And we know that with research, things are always shifting all the time. So doing that together with young people is so important. So this brings us over to our next question, what motivates us to actually work in partnership with young people? Again, a really important question to understand the underlying motivations as to why we do this and why this is a key cohort to engage with. And there's many benefits and impacts of partnering with young people in research. And so, Jaameeta, as a researcher who's working again in this space, what are some things that motivate you to engage in research partnership with young people?
That's a really good question. I think there's a lot of literature out there around the benefits and impacts, as you said. Researchers describe feeling that research is more relevant and more aligned to young people's needs and preferences if they're involved. Including young people in the work obviously helps with participant recruitment and retention because young people are seen to be actively involved. It creates more trust in the research because it's informed by young people. And I guess all of this makes it credible then that the research is likely to be more effective. And I think these are all interesting reasons. They focus a lot on the utility of youth engagement, but I almost wonder if a valuable addition to this would be to give some space and time to reflect on why adults want to partner with young people. And I think reflexivity is a really useful tool for unpacking your own motivation in this space, and then positioning yourself so you're actually consciously aware, where am I coming from with this? And then that really helps you detail your role as an adult ally. And of course, this is a continuous iterative process. It happens gradually. I'm still on my learning journey. But I think what I've learned is that, and Angelica's already spoken about this a lot, is building relationships is so important. I think this is the case for any human interaction, really, but when partnering with young people, this comes to the front and center right at the beginning. So one of my roles then as the adult ally is to make sure that I'm facilitating the nurturing of relationships. And I honestly think it's as important as getting your study design right, getting those outcome measures to align. It's an incredible part of what you need to do. I think also approaching this with curiosity and humility makes you more open to learning. It facilitates new ways of approaching something, and might actually be quite helpful in tackling some of the wicked problems that we're trying to address. It helps to infuse some creativity and fresh perspectives on going about something. I think it's really important to acknowledge power and privilege. So not just know about it, but acknowledge it. And power is held by all parties, the young people involved as well as the adults. And I think it's important to recognize these and acknowledge them, because then you can leverage your superpowers to advance these shared goals of the work that you're doing together. The other thing that I've heard from young people that I've had the privilege of partnering with, and Angelica, you've spoken to this, is being transparent about the parameters in which we're operating. And sometimes providing behind the scene updates. So sometimes, young people that you work with won't be involved in every single task. I mean, ethics applications are as dry as they get. And so sometimes there's that background work that's happening, but giving a sense of what's going on helps the young people that you're partnering at least understand what's happening, and there isn't this long period of silence. And sometimes also being upfront about progress. It isn't about making excuses why you have to do it the adult way, but really putting on the table the factors that you're working with, and either coming up with workarounds together, or just a shared agreement that these are kind of the limits in which we operate, and if there are areas that we want to change, perhaps we put that on the agenda for the future. And I think this really contributes to sustaining relationships and also contributes to shared learning. Where do the motivations of young people sit, Angelica?
There are so many different things that the research has actually pointed to from what young people have said as to why they engage in partnership. But I think also what's really important is to realize that for young people, research is something we're really interested in to begin with. I think there can be a misconception that it's, boring, or it's like, not as engaging as something else that young people like to do. Young people are constantly wanting to be part of asking the questions as to why, like why is, or the how, or building things, right? And so to that first like sticky note you see there, like, for a lot of young people, we just have interests in particular top areas of focus. And why I think this is really important is sometimes we can pigeonhole and assume that young people are only particularly interested in certain things. A great example recently of a co-research project I'm involved in as more of like actually a senior author and having young people lead the project is they're looking at the commercial determinants of health and what that looks like in their day-to-day. And we were talking about someone said, oh, I didn't know that young people would want to even talk about big companies, etc. And they all had a discussion as to know why companies and why the way in which systems are set up is important to them. So young people kind of jump into this because they have an interest in a particular project focus, or are really touched by certain areas, and that's a kind of equity lens that comes into this. Also, research is an opportunity for connection. I know for myself, as someone who has lived in context and grown up in context that you can categorize as, being historically marginalized, etc., is that you don't often get a lot of opportunities to connect in ways that are different, or ways that actually show you what's out there. And so for a lot of young people, like, research and engaging in partnership can be an opportunity for that. And I know of many friends who have built connections where this has actually led to a job for them. So again, this equity piece in partnership, it really has a profound impact on young people. Being able to just make a difference. We know that no matter what the project is, research contributes in some way, shape or form. And so young people are really tuned to that as well. Building relationships, trust and networks, and opportunities to see what professional networking actually looks like. And as someone who's spent time consulting with young people in like my advocacy roles in the past, if there's one thing that constantly comes up from young people is I want to know, you know, how to build more networks. I want to be able to connect and build that professional networking skill. So that's a really common thing that does come up as a motivation. Another one is getting to challenge assumptions and existing structures and goals. I think this is, again, from like an equity standpoint for a lot of like I said at the start, young people are not a homogenous group. And so within that, you'll see different cohorts that are trying to challenge assumptions that are either about them and their lived experience, also structures and systems in which they have to operate and navigate as well. And so research provides an avenue, and research partnership provides an avenue to explore that as well. Feeling valued and heard. When I got the opportunity to produce this body of work from this entirely youth-led project that we did with Plan International Australia, it was all about exploring girls and young women's and non-binary people's experiences of a post-pandemic world. We got to share that in many different forums, all the way to sharing that to some really senior world leaders in the United Nations Commission for Human Rights and different platforms. And that for us was actually very transformative. I know one young person in particular who was 16 at the time who was involved in this, their confidence and their ability to share about their own lived experience, they felt so valued and felt so seen. And so I think we underestimate how powerful research partnership can be for that. Learning new skills and knowledge and ways of thinking. Jaameeta, you just talked about ethics. I'm just in this process of like teaching these young people how to go through, you know, ethics applications, and they have strangely to me found it really fun, which is, I've never heard that before, but for them it was fun because it was a new thing, right? And there's ways in which we can work with, you know, traditionally, you know, ethics, etc., is not attuned to people who don't have a background in research, but that doesn't mean you can't teach young people about it, what it looks like, how the system works, why we do it. And so for them, they've been really proud of themselves being able to submit something in and just let their project be assessed. And I think that that's really exciting, and learning and building that knowledge as well. And then lastly, contributing to change. And we know that this is why, I mean, even this series exists, is that we need to be thinking about research in translation in a way where it contributes to change for certain populations and health. And so young people, again, in their daily lives, part of this, and really, again, a cohort who are quite activated and want to contribute in meaningful ways. So for me, I know that those are reasons I've reflected on as a young person as well. And even in the research partnership that I get to be involved with Jaameeta, like, you know, learning about different ways in which we can build the competencies of people, of adults, has been a new way of thinking for myself. So that's exciting. So this leads us into our next question.
Yeah, and so I guess now we're shifting into more practical aspects of how to operate partnerships. What do you think are some of the key considerations when you're trying to actually implement your model of youth engagement?
Yeah, so we're kind of going now into that how piece, right? And I guess like something that I know a lot of you might have questions on as to what does, you know, how do you actually approach partnership? I think a good place, your starting point, is to really be clear about your principles and values and the things that are governing your work. So, you know, youth participatory action research actually offers a particular paradigm to work within, and it aligns with equal partnerships and youth leadership, but also consider challenging that adultism, you know, that can sometimes underpin our work, right? And we as people who work in this space often are attuned to, I guess, a risk, seeing children and young people under this risk kind of umbrella, which makes sense, but also that's the challenge here with the adultism point of view that we have to think about in what underpins our work. So at its extreme is where young people feel like they're oppressed and that their expertise is being diminished. Challenging this position involves focusing on youth assets, so the things that are our strengths, the things that we also want to develop in, but also actively creating opportunities for different youth voice and input and leadership throughout your process. The next is then selecting a model that to situate your approach and what your research is aiming for. So specifically what that looks like is thinking about tools, and there's numerous frameworks that are available for you to think about to apply to your work. There's ones that are more focused on power distribution, if that's something that you value or you're placing emphasis on in your work. There's Hart's ladder, there's also the type period, and a few others. Another kind of category of framework is those process-focused frameworks, and they're ones that explore implementation options for engagement and thinking about different youth-friendly strategies. I also like to use the word youth affirming sometimes, and I've heard that directly from a young person who said it's not enough to just be friendly in research. You have to actually affirm our experiences, and I think that's really powerful. And then other frameworks that exist is like a more impact-focused framework. So impact focus that concentrates on what changes occur as a result of working with young people. So institutional practices, behavioral changes, and learning. Then another kind of good place is to think about demand. So is this what young people actually want you to be exploring? And to verify that what you have in mind and what you're thinking about doing is actually what we're interested in, or what is actually our current state at the moment. And I think this can sometimes be a challenge as well, because we're either going based off what our interests are, and this is why we started with those questions at the start, right? To really reflect on your own motivations. Because sometimes research can be imposed on young people, or we're invited into things and we sit and we wonder, oh, actually, is this really for us, or is this more for you? And being transparent about that is really important. And then capacity. Are you able to support this approach at all? So, being really honest about whether research partnership actually is the approach that you're wanting and willing to take. And there's different, tools to think about that, and around readiness and assessing your readiness. The Young and Resilient Research Centre, who are an absolute powerhouse when it comes to all things to do with co-research, they actually have a tool developed, which is a youth co-research readiness assessment tool. You can scan the QR code in the corner there, or you can just research it. There's a whole bunch of tools that exist and resources that you can really lean on to assess whether this is actually, you have the capacity to really engage in this approach. Also, in addition to this, I hope, Jaameeta, are you happy for me to continue?
Yeah, go for it. You're nailing it.
Also, in your approaches, you need to think about accountability. So it's really important to embed mechanisms of accountability in partnership, and what that might look like is terms of reference. I think, it just sets out, guidelines for the work that we're doing. You can actually design those with young people in mind. A great example is I was involved in a team of youth advocates that were embedded within a Centre for Research Excellence for driving global investment in adolescent health. And from the outset, we actually worked together with the coordinator, who was our main support, and again had already thought about all their motivations, etc., to design this terms of reference together. What is the purpose and scope of the activities we're doing? What are our roles and responsibilities? What decision-making processes do we get to be involved in? What are the deliverables? What are we reporting on? And what are the available resources that we have? All the things that we'd like to seek out in this partnership together. And so terms of reference is such a great tool just to describe the specific elements governing the partnership that you're working with young people. And I think it's something for, as a young person, you can always refer back to. I have to do that often, all the time, both as a young person, but also as a researcher, to go, what did we agree on again? What did we talk about again? What are the young people expecting of me? In addition to your approach is thinking about leadership. So ensuring there's opportunities for youth leadership throughout the process if you're going to adopt a partnership. A simple example is when you're doing meetings together with young people for your research project, who gets to chair them? Who gets to set up the agenda? Do you talk about that in consultation with young people so they know, or do we just come in with, this is what I want to talk about with you guys and we're going to leave after that? I think I've seen young people be able to chair and co-chair meetings together with another young person or with a researcher, and that's a skill that they've now gone and put down as things that they have in their skill set for, for their resume, etc. And so again, it's another opportunity for us to build leadership opportunity. Jaameeta, I know you have a great example as well here.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of the National Roadmap project that I'm involved with a larger team, and we have a national youth governance group, and there are several mechanisms for leadership there. We have 2 co-chairs that convene that youth national group, and then we've got special interest groups that are created to align with the diversity of interests that young people have. Not everybody wants to, be involved in writing an academic paper, but some people want to be involved in something else. And then within those special interest groups, we've got subgroup leads. So you've got this whole mechanism of youth leaders that give young people an opportunity to lead special areas, but also represent the group's ideas, concerns, ways of thinking and doing to the research team. So it's this parallel mechanism that works. And that's actually been really interesting to see.
Amazing. Thank you. The other really important point that I think you can't escape now because there's so much been published about it is remuneration and recognition. This is something that young people constantly bring up, is actually how do we value their expertise? How do we actually make sure that this is fundamental to work? It's actually something that's become non-negotiable in some settings. And so when you're from the outset thinking about, a research translation project or an initiative or working with young people, are you thinking about how you're going to recognize and remunerate their contributions? And so there are some examples that are listed there around employment. So some people actually get onboarded as either youth co-researchers. You may not have the means or availability to do that. And we're not saying that has to be what you do, but there's other things to consider. Sitting fees, especially if you're running a few different meetings, particularly if you have a governance group of some sort, or etc. Co-authorship. If you're producing anything, do young people get to actually have their their contributions recognized as authors or as researchers as part of this process? And also being co-investigators. If you for some of you who might be engaged in research work where you are publishing, where you are producing something. And I had this question of a young person recently who said, do I get to be listed in the ethics as a co-investigator? And I was like, you are here, you're a co-investigator. And so for them, really thinking about recognition looks like different things. It could also, what's also not listed here is, recognition through presenting and opportunities that come from the work. But I do really want to preface that when young people are working and spending, an hour or two on a project and doing the quite literally similar things to you, and they're not being remunerated, I always mix up that word, that is a power imbalance automatically. So it's really important to think about that. And from an equity standpoint, for a lot of young people who are, when you think about whether it's young people with disability or young people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, etc., or again, who are experiencing compounding marginalization from systems that don't work for them, not being remunerated for your time is not negotiable. So Jaameeta, I know you've got also examples to this as well.
Yeah, well, maybe I can just speak to broader factors that create an enabling environment, because I think that's kind of where we're leading to, right? And we've mentioned a lot of things, but I think there's 3 fundamental things to create an enabling environment to support these partnerships: connection, communication, and learning. And I think with connection, we've got to think about embedding activities within our research endeavors that facilitate building that relationship between researchers and young people, but also among young people themselves. It's kind of like thinking about how a team works. And if you're going to have these 2 to 5 year initiatives with young people, you've got to embed opportunities to connect, especially because relational aspects are so important. And one of the things we've sort of done in the National Roadmap Project was we have these annual in-person get-togethers where young people across the country that are partnering with us come to Adelaide because that's where we're based. And we have a good mix of business, so core research tasks that we need to complete, as well as opportunities for connection. And there are benefits to it because that initial expression of interest that people fill out to join your youth advisory groups absolutely do not tell you who the person is. But these continuous engagements, you get to learn about people, about the wealth of experience and expertise that they have. So it has some utility for the research and the work that you're doing as well. An important thing to note is I think a lot of the emphasis on events and connection seems to lie at the beginning of the projects. But with these long-term partnerships, you kind of have to embed them across the entire life cycle. The other thing that I think we've been alluding to for this entire conversation is this idea about communication. Communication is fundamental to any partnership, and this equally applies to partnerships that you have with young people. You really need to close that information loops to make sure that everybody's on the same page, but it also helps to support accountability. And I think you need to include a diversity of strategies for communication, both to meet diverse needs and preferences, but also to encourage transformative contributions. And what I mean by that is creating a safe space for those wild ideas, as well as creating a safe space to engage respectfully where there are differences. And I really loved what you said about creating third spaces, Angelica.
Yeah, like one of the things that I think I find quite exciting is when we're trying to remember that big orange circle that was over relationships in a few slides back. All of this on this point around creating enabling environments is around the relationships that are sustained long term over whatever you're doing with young people, right? And one of the things that I've seen really work effectively is creating third spaces within your projects or within your initiatives. So they really break away from the really heavy data related, research related activities, but just allow you to get to know each other more, really kind of find similarities, differences, interests, explore new ideas. I've gotten to do that through projects where we just have spaces to chat, emotionally debrief. Sometimes they go into different pathways. Poetry as well. There was one time where we pretty much set up like this. It was like in the mid project, and the coordinator and us young people, we just set up this space to explore things creatively, and it led down us creating like this poem together. We don't know how we got there, but the whole idea was that it didn't have an agenda. It was just a third space to connect. And I think it can feel like, oh, but we don't have time to do this. We don't have, it doesn't have to look extravagant. It can just be really simple spaces where young people and the researchers just get to chat and build further kind of connection together that breaks away from the main work. But like Jaameeta said, that being continuous, and asking the young people, if you're not sure where to start with that, ask them, like, what are some things that you think along the way can be activities that we can do together simply that allow for this, and let them come up with the ideas.
I'm mindful of time, but I'll quickly chat about that third piece, which is learning. And I think that's really important. I think as co-research, co-design, and partnerships grow as a space, we're seeing a lot more resources to support capacity building for young people. And that's amazing. So for instance, on the National Roadmap Project, we had scholarships embedded within there. So young people could use those on an annual basis towards professional development to support their roles. We also had these knowledge exchange sessions, which aren't your traditional research methods training, but this platform for shared dialogue. So we as adult researchers can learn from their experience and they can learn from ours. And, everyone's kind of, once again, tapping into their superpower. But I think the piece that's kind of missing from the conversation, although it's growing, is this idea that adult allies also need to learn. And so that's kind of what we're doing on the C3 project, which Angelica and I are collaborating on with an absolute dynamic steering committee. We're trying to understand, based on the growing experience, what is essential for adults to be able to do and to know to create enabling environments. We're also going to try and codify what the essential elements for reporting are, because as the number of endeavors are growing, so are the number of presentations and papers, but there isn't consistency in what we're reporting. So it's very difficult to learn from shared experience. It's difficult to also hold people accountable. When you say you're doing co-design, there has to be a bare minimum amount of information that you describe so that people can actually judge or understand where you come from in this space. I think doing this will also help us fill the gap around the impact of partnerships. I think right now we rely a lot on anecdotal evidence around the benefits, but once we start standardizing reporting, we can actually look at the impact. And so if you want to contribute to the conversation, please scan the QR code, and we are so keen to chat with as many people as we can. And I guess this leads nicely into the last part of the conversation, which is, Angelica, what do you think are the conditions or those broader contextual factors that actually might help to support effective partnerships with young people? I think many of these will actually be common across all consumer groups, but are particularly important for young people.
I'm going to blitz through this just because of time, but very quickly, I wanted to kind of point to, why we do this is because we're trying to support lived expertise, right? And so what is needed to support youth leadership and research that, or what we're trying to get at here is that we need to think about the factors that actually support us in research that's going to inform policy, that's going to transform the systems in which young people get to or have to participate in or engage with, but also to share evidence back to the community for their use and their engagement. And there's so many different ways in which you can support different lived experience, but there's two really great examples that are put up on here on this screen that are contextual, particularly for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and young people, and that actually I believe all have authors that are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, young people who've been involved in writing and talking about what are the things to consider in terms of participation and lived experience so that we can inform policy, so that we can actually inform services that impact them and etc. So you can research these. They're really, really great and have so many different tools and evidence in them around participation. I'm going to throw back over to you. Actually, no, I'm not going to throw back over to you, Jaameeta, very quickly. I'm just going to comment on the fact that, there is a need for more funding structures to enable research groups to engage with young people in the right way. So that's funding for appropriate remuneration, funding for capacity building for both young people and adults, directed towards better partnership and more effective research. And given the significance of relational aspects that we've talked about, having funding for activities to support connection and relationship building. And I know there's something already that exists as an opportunity to inform that. Jaameeta, if you want to very quickly share.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say I'm really encouraged to see that NHMRC and the Consumer Health Forum for Australia are taking leadership in this space and are currently revising their statement on consumer and community involvement. They're very clearly trying to articulate the responsibilities of the researchers, the consumers, and funding and remuneration is explicitly mentioned in there. So that's really encouraging. If you want to join the conversation on these national consultations, please scan the QR code. The Kids Research Institute is facilitating this. And I think the more people that contribute to this conversation, the easier it'll be for us to help influence the conditions that we need as researchers to actually be able to support meaningful partnerships with all consumers.
Yeah, we might actually just maybe gloss over these in 20 seconds so we can get to your questions. But The other things to think about is, there is a call for more leadership and meaningful youth representation across a few key areas. So these are some of them that hopefully even for yourselves who are really passionate or interested in this can help contribute to. And there's, a really great example from Canteen that they've been exploring around how to embed youth leadership into organizational structures. So if you needed a really tangible example of that, you can check out what Canteen has been doing on this work in particular. And then very quickly, translation. So that's the other kind of, why we're here as well. So the need for there to be more inclusive and flexible processes to be involved in policy, academic publishing, and service provision. Jaameeta, did you want to say anything very quickly here?
I just wanted to say, although this is positioned at the tail end of the research cycle, it's kind of the most important. Getting that evidence that we're generating into policy and practice. I mean, this is the action space. And I think we're on an upward trajectory, but there still needs to be a little bit of work bridging the gaps between how we operate these processes so they're more inclusive and flexible. And I think the Engage strategy is very exciting because it signals an appetite for youth engagement. But I think it'd be really great to also see that these youth leadership positions in the policy space get linked up with the youth leadership positions in the evidence generation space, because then I think we're taking a step in the right direction. I think right now there's a bit of a disconnect. And then in the publishing space, we're seeing a lot of cool stuff happening. I mean, young people with very enthusiastic adult allies are pushing the boundaries so that young people, including minors, are included as co-authors and their contributions recognized. But I think we still need to explore opportunities for having youth leaders in these spaces. So I'm thinking more youth positions on editorial boards, more youth guest editors on special supplements. Let's bring young people into the leadership spaces where decisions are being made. And I'll just leave you with a recommendation to read this amazing perspective piece by Rao and colleagues. I mean, they really highlight the sort of things that young people would feel is transformative for the academic publishing space. I think I'll leave it there.
Awesome. So I'm going to share the Menti as we're kind of doing questions as well, because I think there's some really cool things that came up that is really powerful in this word cloud. But if you'd like to connect with us and continue this conversation, here are our email addresses. We're also very approachable on all things, I think LinkedIn, all the things. So do connect with us. I'm going to stop sharing, and I see Sarah, you've come up as well, which is great.
Back here.
Yes. And very quickly, just to show everyone what you came up with. Let's see. Can you all see that? This like big yellow bright thing. Cool. So what is essential for partnering well with young people? You've thought about engagement, being innovative and creative, co-design, flexibility, acknowledgement, so many cool things. Obviously, the bigger the word, the more times it appeared. So engagement and relevance, that's really cool that came up. So with all that we've already talked about, it seems that you're already starting to think about this, which is really powerful. And so all the words here that are reflected here, take that into your work and your partnerships and how you build relationships with children and young people in health research. So I'll stop there.
Oh, thank you both. That was fantastic. There were so many good points, and it's really exciting to hear there's a real appetite by young people to get involved in research, because like you said, that could be a misconception that people think, oh, they don't really care. I liked the simple ways, we talked about simple ways to offer leadership opportunities for younger people, and how that can really build into confidence building and learning how to network, giving all those extra opportunities, their career pathway opportunities as well, and upskilling so they're more going to be more successful when they go for jobs, increasing their knowledge and empowerment. They were all really, really great things. So thank you for touching on all of that. A question that I had, and also there's a question in the Q&A about it. And so you've been talking about, youth, young people. Is there a specific age bracket you guys have been specifically talking about, 18 to 25-year-olds or younger? If you're talking about younger, what other implications come into play, like parental sign-off or approval on this? Do reimbursement rates change? These are the sorts of questions that Agostina and I get asked a bit about when you're engaging with youth. when is that cut off, when it's not just the young person's decision and there's the parental involvement as well?
Jaameeta, do you want to jump in first? And I have some thoughts.
Sure. I think when we're speaking about this, we're thinking about your traditional adolescent space, the 10 to 24. And obviously the considerations with the younger cohort might be slightly different. And I can understand how when you're engaging with legal minors, there's a role for parents. But I think just like we found workarounds in the ethics process where you have assent, I think we need to rethink about how we engage younger adolescents too. I've actually spoken to several that fall between the ages of 12 and 14, then they talk about the space, especially your 14-year-olds, that, you know, when you're 16, you get to learn to drive, you're starting to get all these opportunities to tap into the adult world. And we kind of fall within the cracks, but we have things we want to do, we have things we want to say. And so I think finding age-appropriate ways to actually provide more space to lead is applicable across the entire spectrum. What do you think, Angelica?
Yeah, I think like going to this question, I think sometimes we can see, I mean, there's, to give examples, there's projects where you can bring parents along the way if it's relevant. There's also, if I give an example of a project I was involved in where we were speaking to children, so people, it was between 14 to 18, about their experiences in participation and in different forms of care. We sought, of course, consent, and it had to be a different type of consent, not even parental consent from really the places in which they were in care, and even consent from the systems or from the state. So that was like really interesting to seek that, but they kind of already understand that. So there can be a misconception sometimes that children like will be less likely to engage because we've had to seek parental consent or state consent, whatever. But they do. There is some awareness that there has to be permission provided there. Don't see it as an obstacle. Again, these are the things to explain to young people. Also in that project, in terms of remuneration, we had provided like a voucher, and that was made clear as to what would be suitable for that cohort after some consultation we had before with service providers. So seeing what works and what would be most effective, and then they already knew from historically that young people preferred that for this. But also the other type of remuneration we had was for them to be involved in the design of the output, so actually opt into contributing to this short podcast series that we created for this project, or contribute to the actual design of the little report. And so there are different ways in which you can think about that remuneration piece that isn't just around like the financial aspect. So and making that clear in the parental consent forms, that actually we're taking this approach because XYZ. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers a little bit of that. But there's so many great tools that exist around this that we're happy to share.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. There's lots of comments about what great insightful presentations there are. So that's a general comment, theme that's coming through. Someone's asked, if you had to highlight any elements that are critical or unique and specific to partnering with younger people, what would they be?
Oh. That's really interesting. Interesting question. Critical, definitely. I think I've talked about the third spaces before. I think it's very, very critical for you to not just in your engagement or partnership, that it's not just all about the research all the time, that you really put in time. I think that's critical. What's unique is that it's really fun. I think I'm not saying that it's not fun with other groups, but I think you really start to realize how much you learn from different underrepresented groups like young people, and that they will challenge you. I think that that's also what's unique about working with them. They will really challenge your thoughts, and so I think that's unique as well, but yeah, that it's extremely fun. So yeah.
Right. We're getting towards the end. If anyone needs to drop off, please do, but there's just a couple of other questions that I did want to ask, so we're going to go a little bit over if you're both okay with that.
That's okay.
I was thinking about a lot of the co-design stuff we've done in the past, and there's a lot of traditional methods, you know, the butcher's paper and the sticky notes. Like, have you found that you need to use different methods, more innovative ways, whether it's software or approaches that are going to keep younger people engaged, or it doesn't matter, the same processes are okay? Like, do you take a different approach?
That is a very good question. I know Jaameeta will have thoughts around this too. And this is so, to preface, this is so project specific.
Yeah.
I am one of those young people who has been in like projects where when I see the sticky notes, I'm like, oh, again. But like that's honestly what sometimes young people do feel and see. They're like, oh, this is the same kind of thing. There are so many different. It's not to say that it's not great. I think those are foundational and you can still use those. They're effective, they work, and they get ideas, you know, to brainstorm. Other things that are creative ways is using digital tools like I just did with the Mentimeter, or with Miro if you're doing things online. Or, you know, any gamification. Sometimes actually, if you're able to, and if it's within the project, getting out into physical environment and space. And I know for maybe for some of the work you've done, Jaameeta, on the roadmap, like that is really important to actually be doing and holding conversations, like, you know, on country in spaces is really important. Other kind of creative things is to think about, different types of games, or to take that butcher's paper idea and make it something else. Like I've, with a group of 5 to 12-year-olds, we like built like what we think our neighborhoods should look like. And we started off like with that. And it was a project all about, you know, developing a community hub together. But rather than doing the sticky notes, we actually used physical things and physical materials and, you know, play and brought in play in that way, and that being, and again, it's how you code for that is really up to you and your methods. But take like, you know, explore different forms of play and use like digital tools a lot more. But it's not to negate sticky notes and butcher's paper, the classic.
Yeah, no, that covers a lot of the really great suggestions. I think the other thing is, and sometimes just providing principles isn't as helpful as practical solutions, but I think what principles do is give you the flexibility to adapt to the young people and the context and the project you're working on. I think flexibility and openness to changing your method is probably really helpful. So you can start with whatever, but actively seeking feedback. And sometimes the process really involves. And I'm thinking of this really interesting work that I was looking at. I wasn't involved in it, but I was reading about it, and they were talking about how they're trying to involve young people in the analysis process, and they had, you know, your usual coding process. But then what they found is that young people started categorizing and creating this tree sort of image. And so they developed a whole new way of analysis and presenting results just organically based on how young people were responding to post-its, because that's what they had started off with, like just stick your post-its. But then young people had this sort of visual way of thinking, and they were looking at branching, and it just evolved into this really cool tool. And so I think flexibility to change and be responsive to how young people are responding to a thing is really, really important. And then looking outside your traditional spaces. So in an academic paper, you usually have your table of results and your figures, but sometimes young people want to represent things using art. So be open to that, and maybe, you know, create a shared piece of artwork that you then unpack to represent your qualitative results, for instance.
Yeah.
Have you found that you can include photos of those pieces of art in academic publications as supplementary files?
Yeah. I think it's a complicated process, but I think,
it's definitely, I know that there's like particular parameters, etc. And again, like that's part of the transparency you provide to young people. But yeah, there's definitely been initiatives as a young person I've been involved in where it came out later that we wanted to include this in some of the outputs, like the photos, all the things that we had drawn, etc. And so that consent was again renegotiated with us as to like where this is going, how it's going to be used. And we thought, yeah, great, like we'd love it to be, and worked with the processes to make that happen. So yeah, it is possible. It is possible.
I'm thinking of alternative spaces. Sometimes academic publications aren't the end all, like other spaces where young people are actually more involved and have more control. So,
great. I'm just going to ask one final question from the chat. How do you address intersectionality when engaging with young people?
This is a really good question. Thank you for asking it. Because intersectionality, I think I always tell people when they think about intersectionality, we think about identities separate. And like we still silo things, and as opposed to realizing that young people are a whole person in and of themselves. They can't pick an identity out from the corner of their body and put it somewhere. Like, it's how they are is who they are. And so sometimes when even in participation that I've been involved in, and people are, asking for a certain thing, maybe from my experiences as being a culturally and linguistically diverse young person, is I can't divorce that from being also a young woman. I can't divorce that from being, from a low socioeconomic background. Like, that is really important, one, in terms of framing, to remember when you're thinking about intersectionality. And so with that framing, then how you address intersectionality is to very simply ask young people, how do they feel like in their context and in their whole selves, how would they like to participate, and what uniquely supports them? Because me as a young, African woman, and if I have another sister of mine next to me, we will probably say two different things. So that's why asking the questions is really important, despite our identities maybe being on paper the same. And again, addressing intersectionality at different stages of the process. So maybe thinking that for some young people, they may not have had access to certain information around publication by way of just like the environments that they've grown up in. Maybe that requires a little bit more learning for that young person versus another young person. So that's you addressing intersectionality there. Your terms of reference, how is it written to reflect the different experiences so that it is an inclusive experience? How are you setting up meetings? Like I said, are they ones where there are clear goals written for young people who need that versus, young people who may not and are used to just free-flowing things? So that's how you address intersectionality, thinking about inclusion in the every small stages, and they're the small things. Like I said, even how you write outputs, how you a good example is like even the tools for communication. Email doesn't work for some young people. It does for others. In some projects, I've had to use WhatsApp for a very particular reason that I'm not going to homogenize all culturally and linguistically diverse communities, but I remember one project where the young people were like, use WhatsApp. We're always using that because our families are constantly, so we're used to it. So, think about that's intersectionality at play there, right? Is like, you've got to think about that at different points. And yeah, hopefully that makes sense. So yeah.
It does. And I like the bit about email, because I found that recently with dealing with younger people, their email is very unresponsive for a lot of them, not for everyone, again. So that's really interesting, because that's the standard way of working in the office in academia. All right, we're going to finish there. Thank you so much for both coming along. There's more great compliments coming through about how interesting this was. I just want to let everyone know that we have a Consumer and Community Involvement in Research Masterclass coming up on Tuesday, the 16th of September. And the details for that are on our website. And thank you, everyone, for coming along. And again, thank you to you both for your great presentation and insights. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.